meeting, which is on the International Mathematical Union, its role past, present and future. So my name is John Ball. I represent the past of the IMU. But it's been a great pleasure to speak to the present members of the Executive Committee, and clearly the organization is in very good hands. The plan for this session is that first of all we're going to have a half-hour lecture from Norbert Schappacher on the history of IMU, and then we'll have four sort of more or less 5-minute talks from the current president, Hiraku, Nakajima, from Nalini Joshi on the relations between IMU and the International Science Council, from Carola-Bibiane Schönlieb on the Committee for Women in Mathematics, and from Tamar Ziegler about the Commission for Developing Countries. So over to Norbert.
Yeah, thank you very much for this invitation. It came as a surprise and as a pleasant surprise, even though this book that I wrote for the IMU between, well, essentially 2020-21, started in late 2019, is already way behind me, but it's very good memory. It's particularly also a good memory because it made me go very often to the headquarters of the IMU in Berlin, look at parts of the archive. Certainly didn't have the time to look at all of it. Far from it, and so I'm happy to share some of my reminiscences and some aspects of the book which might be useful also in view of the meeting of the Executive Committee this coming weekend, tomorrow and Sunday. Never ask a historian what you can learn from history. I'm not sure I'm an historian or not, but this is definitely a good warning. History has to be rewritten by every new generation. You have certainly heard this before. So you may ask, how will the history of the IMU be written 20 years from now or 30 years from now? This is a good question that one should think about, but of course it's a question where it's very hard to give concrete takeaways for the Executive Committee members for this upcoming meeting. Anyway, this is the title page of the book that I wrote, and just for starters, I should say that it was end of January or the very first days of February 2022 that the manuscript was completely finished and went off to Springer, so this was it. And then the world changed a bit, at least the geopolitical situation, and so I immediately felt that this is a book of the past even before it has actually appeared, and I think this very seriously. So let's just give a little bit of overview, the overall timeline of events treated in my book. So I start very early. I start in the 19th century. Why did I do this? Because it was in the 19th century that the professional structure of mathematics was built. I mean, before that, you don't have it. Mathematics as a discipline and as a community with jobs, mathematics departments and journals, specific, very important journals, that structure this community and that then could create in the first place this need for national and international organization of the field. So this is reviewed in part 1 of the book. And then you have different timelines in the, so this goes up to say World War I, so the extended, the long 19th century, as historians say. And then you get into the 20th century, and there is the immediate post-World War I. Then there is the interwar period, very interesting, and I would say if you just indicate, I mean, this is a short talk, I mean, just indicate a few things about that. And then comes World War II, and after World War II, everything is recreated. So let's think about what it means, IMU, International Mathematical Union, or just more generally, Science International, Mathematics International. There is this idea that has been repeated by many people on certain occasions that mathematics is particularly prone for international cohesion and co-organization because it has this formal language, so you don't have to learn another language that you cannot speak and so on. So communication should be easier, and this idea is, I think, completely misled. This is well, it also is in itself is difficult to understand because formalism can be read in different ways, but never mind. I mean, it is, if you look at the history, what happens to the international organization of the field of mathematics by going from the 19th to the 20th century is not at all specific to mathematics. It is a very general internationalization movement which develops curious at the same time as nationalism thrives, especially in Europe. So we are talking in the 19th century about a completely Eurocentric history for these scientific domains that I'm referring to. So it's a very general historical phenomenon, and this is just one example I quote. It's not at all from mathematics. The polar explorer, a German one, who says, while I have always upheld, as should be clear from what I said before, the national conviction that we have to promote the expansion of our German maritime powers by large-scale oceanographic and geographic research, it does give me the greatest satisfaction that the problem of the Antarctic will now be tackled not in a unilateral national way, but jointly with other nations. It's a contradiction in itself, and this contradiction marks this period from the 19th to the 20th century. Internationalism accompanies the formation of national states and strong nationalistic political convictions. So the other thing is there anything special about mathematics, like the first remark that I made? The answer is clearly no, as I have already indicated. And so in the book, at several places, I have compared what happens on the international scene in mathematics and in history. I have explicitly not chosen a natural science, which would sort of be close to mathematics, but history. I mean, in history, you think there is no formal language. This is part of the humanities. You have to rewrite history every generation. Okay. So, but if you, for example, compare international congresses, on the left, you have the ICMs, International Congress of Mathematics, and here, of mathematicians, and here you have the International Congresses of the Historians, and there's clearly a completely parallel development, even though there was nothing directly comparable to the IMU on the side of the historians. By the way, while we look at this list, I only show it once, so the whole thing starts without any IMU. It's just an activity. You get together a group of mathematicians organizing one congress after the other. There is not an international organization behind it. And it starts in 1897 in Zurich. And then in 1916, it was supposed to be by Mittag-Leffler hosted in Stockholm, but then was World War I, so this didn't happen. Then comes after World War I, Strasbourg and Toronto. These are the only two in this first half of the 20th century, the only two congresses that were actually organized by the IMU or simultaneously to the founding of the IMU. As of 28, the first IMU has already died. There's Bologna, Zurich, Oslo, then World War II, and then comes the new history as of 1950, and as of 1962, the newly founded second IMU, founded in 50, or well, actually constituted in 51, will take over the organization of those ICMs as of the 62 one in Stockholm. So it's just, there is nothing special about mathematics as far as the desire and also the willingness and the actual facts of organizing international congresses are concerned. However, a question which I cannot really answer, but I suspect, the work has not been done as far as I know by anybody, I suspect that there is something special about the ICMs compared to international congresses of other fields, but I have not gone through other fields, namely the enormous importance that distinctions related to ICMs has for careers of mathematicians is something really unique. I'm not talking just about the Fields Medal. I'm talking about the fact that if you're invited as a sectional or as a plenary speaker to an ICM, this is a point in your career which is clearly recognized by mathematics departments all over the world. And this strong phenomenon seems not to be are present in the same way in other fields. So this was sort of an introductory remark. When was this picture taken? Well, if you don't tell me, whom do you recognize?
Von Neumann.
Ah, von Neumann, very good. Who is this guy? Nobody? Jean-Pierre Serre, Kodaira. Okay, 1954, Amsterdam ICM, reception at the palace of the Queen of the Netherlands. And so I put a few names there so you can get oriented. I don't have to explain all this. And on the shoulders of the two people who have just received their Fields Medal the same morning, Serre and Kodaira, the hands there are on Serre's shoulders, they are the hands of Hermann Weil, and on Kodaira it's Severi, who in his left hand also has a cigarette. And yeah, okay, so here you see many people. It's a wonderful picture. What does this picture tell us? Well, various things. There is there is, of course, the Queen of the Netherlands. It's the obvious fact, but it bears being mentioned, I think, in a talk like the one I'm giving here on this occasion, that whenever you organize such an event as an ICM, you have to somehow deal with the local political authorities of the country that you are organizing it in. So in this case, it was the Queen of the Netherlands, and she received the selected, committee members and so on, and the two prize winners after the opening ceremony. Okay, other thing, apart from her, there's only one woman from Cambridge, Mary Cartwright, and no other woman. And there is exactly one man who is not either from Europe or the US, Kodaira. So these are things that you can see. Any other, well, I guess I have to go on and not spend too much time on this. So the Fields Medal, awarded since 1936, is today the most visible distinction that you get at an ICM. Its detailed history is not in my book, simply because the archives are closed for quite a long time for the Fields Medal things. But the distinction I already mentioned. The IMU is a non-government organization, as you all know. Still, you have to somehow deal with governments when you're organizing a big congress. There is only one woman present, and Kodaira is and then this is just, but I'm not going to go into this, this is just a little beginning of the presence of, in this case, Japanese mathematicians at ICMs, and there are other similar sections in my book. I jump to the 10th chapter of my book and say a few words which I put under framing ICMs. So the first, as I already mentioned, the first ICMs were organized without any international organization behind them. It is true that in I think it was in 1908 in Rome, if I'm not mistaken, the IMU-INI, for mathematical instruction, the sub-organization, which today is a sub-organization of the IMU, at the time there was no IMU, was founded. So this is sort of a spontaneous creation from these ICMs, but otherwise there was no international union of mathematics organizing them, but they were ad hoc organizations, and there are lots of things that can be said about it. I won't go into this. Now we jump, as I indicated in the timeline before, to after World War I, which is something which is very important to get the right perspective on the IMU, is to see how the first IMU was created. The way to create it is top-down. I just mentioned the IMU-INI that came out of activities, in particular also inspired by Felix Klein on the teaching of mathematics and so. So you can say the formation of this sub-organization about mathematical instruction, that's bottom-up. But the creation of the first IMU was clearly top-down, and the same is more or less also the fact for the IMU, which still exists today. Namely, first of all, they founded the IRC, the International Research Council, and there were the Big Five, as the Times called them, the big George Hale, Lecoin Schuster, and Émile Picard, and Vito Volterra, who created this IRC, this International Research Council, not at all limited to mathematics, even though the two were, of course, mathematicians. And this was prepared already in the first Inter-Allied meeting in October 1918. And it was set up as an umbrella organization for scientific unions. So first you create the IRC. You write the statutes, the rules of the IRC. And then once this is set up, international unions following these general rules lined out in the statutes of the IRC can be founded. This is the way it proceeds. And of course, there were two political motivations behind this, characteristic of the situation after the end of World War I, taking control by excluding the Central Powers, in particular Germany, and perpetuating state-financed, war-related applied research, which, even though it didn't exist to the same extent as during World War II, did exist to a certain extent in World War I, in particular, for example, in Italy. Vito Volterra was very much impressed by this. Neutral states, such as the Netherlands or Sweden, were only invited after the other states had joined the IRC and then likewise the international unions, and everything was done very quickly in order not to lose control of the international scene. And this is a slide from a colleague working on the history of academies and international organizations. If you see, so it's not mathematics here, because mathematics, the IMU was practically ready to be created in 1919, but there were not enough votes in a certain assembly, so officially it only exists as of 1920. But as of 1919, we have astronomy, geology, chemistry, radio science, and biology, international unions for those. And if you look at the presidents, they are all French, or the French or Belgian. So you see, it's a clearly, it's biased, clearly, in the sense of the political situation at the end of World War I. Then comes the fact that at this meeting in Brussels in 1919, the mathematicians say, okay, we're going to organize a conference in Strasbourg, which had become French again after this German intermediate period. That ended in 1918, and so there was this international congress that was organized in Strasbourg, and it was called, in one of the opening lectures, opening addresses of a politician, La Grande Manifestation Patriotique et Scientifique, patriotic and scientific event. The result of this is that a certain number of participants, and in particular US American participants, would have second thoughts about having participated. So this is just one example, Norbert Wiener's memoirs, the Germans were excluded. Okay, in my nature, in my mature, considered opinion, punitive measures are out of place in international scientific relations. Perhaps it would have been possible to hold a truly international meeting for another couple of years, but this delay would have been preferable to what actually did take place, the nationalization of a truly international institution. So while until 1914, nationalism, national states, and internationalizations, in ways that are sometimes hard to understand, work together, they are completely separated immediately after World War I. This is what you can see from this. Then comes the next Congress that was supposed to take place in the US, but then Fields moved it to Toronto. So, and there was a lot of, the disagreeable tempest. This is a quote from, anyway, so there was a lot of miscontent with the way that this whole, these congresses were organized under the heading of this IRC, founded in this peculiar situation. And so 4 years later, in 1928, Salvatore Pinkerle organized the ICM in Bologna without any help of the IMU, already independent, but he had the backing of Duce, Capo del Governo, Mussolini, and this is the way that the IMU became less and less important. And then something happened which is in a way difficult to explain, because this did not happen in the other sciences like chemistry and so on. It was when this whole thing, this whole new system was set up in 1918, they had a sort of a sunset clause, that is, after 12 years one would have to see whether these institutions were good and they should be newly founded officially and maybe slightly restructured. And the IMU didn't manage to be restructured, so it just died. So then the IMU doesn't exist anymore, but the international congresses of mathematicians go on. And there are also other new features that have an enormous importance for the constitution and the way it works of the mathematical community, Rockefeller philanthropies and creation of institutes, of which the Institute for Advanced Study is the primal example. So this is this wonderful period which has maybe one of the best ICMs ever held for one particular, at that period, for one particular reason. This is the ICM with the largest number of young participants before the later decades of the 20th century. So there are lots of young people there in Zurich, and I guess there will be occasion to talk more about such issues. Emmy Noether gave a plenary lecture, first plenary lecture given by a woman at an international congress, and the next one was only 1990. There's this typical phenomenon that you see here in this particular case of the fact that the participation of women was rendered, in fact, more difficult after World War II than it had been in the best times of the interwar period. Okay, I don't have a lot of time. I have 7 minutes and 46 seconds to go. So this is, now we are getting to another world after World War II. The same pattern as we have seen after World War I, that's why I explained that one, is seen. You start from top to bottom. So there is the United Nations, international tribunals are the UNESCO and ICSU are founded, and then the new IMU also. This is the way it is presented in the book, but it's also the logic of what happens. The one person who is behind the renaissance of the IMU, the creation of this very strong new IMU, is of course Marshall Stone. And then, as I already said on this slide where I had all the ICMs up to 2018 shown, it takes a while. The first 3 ICMs after World War II are still organized independently, as was the case before World War II, and then the IMU takes them over and coordinates the organizing. I will say a little bit more about this on the next few slides, but there's just one thing I would particularly mention. You see, it is really after World War II that in an increasing way we begin to have more and more national and international conferences in all the sciences and in particular also in mathematics. And one example which stands out, and I show this slide because it's almost the same slide that I showed 2 days ago at a talk that I gave, is this Tokyo Nikko meeting and algebraic number theory, where you have this another picture with Serre and Henri Vey and Taniyama, taken by Shimura. This is a conference, an international conference that was organized essentially with money from UNESCO. Nowadays, UNESCO is not able anymore to give any money for that kind of activity. It was administered, sort of it was officially set up this conference and administered by the IMU. And there was a big political affair around inviting or not inviting. He was finally not invited. Helmut Hasse, the German participant who would have fit into this conference, and this is detailed in my book over a few pages based on a thesis that was written under, where is he, Volker Remmert's direction in Wuppertal. So my book was not the first one about the history of the IMU. That's Olli Lehto wrote Mathematics Without Borders, came out in 1998. And he has this interesting thing where in the 10th chapter he says this politics interferes with the IMU. Well, as I told you before, this was really not a new affair. And then he tells also, because he was active in the IMU and he organized the ICM in Helsinki, he tells his own personal experiences. And a typical experience is related to visa problems for people wanting to attend the ICM in Helsinki, and even though it was in Finland, and in the beginning he thought there would be no problem, there were problems for some participants, and that got him into some sort of a political trouble. And of course here you can already see from the titles, I'm not going to go into details, that this was only a very punctual problem compared to bigger political problems there were. Given that, I would like to read at least part of this, which is just one case I picked out among many cases. And such cases come up at or connected to ICMs and also independently and are brought to the IMU. So in this case, it was the activity in favor of the communist mathematician from Uruguay, Macera, that was started by Henri Carton and Israel Halper in Toronto, Carton in Paris, of course. And the international campaign has the former support of the Mathematical Societies of Canada, France, Yugoslavia, Italy, Denmark, Czechoslovakia. We anticipated that this list will grow as other mathematical societies can arrange to put the question to their memberships. So the international campaign, Macera, would like to ask the IMU to take one or more of the following actions: issue a public statement expressing the wish that Macera would be allowed to go to France, recommend adhering national organizations, national committees of mathematicians, that they in turn they take such action as they find appropriate, and so on. So the politics in general, I mean, this is what Lehto explains. And here I have from the archives, I have a letter from Lehto to Rosenzweig from May '87. The EC, the Executive Committee, felt that even though as individuals the members are very much concerned with human rights, IMU as an organization should refer such matters to ICSU. What is ICSU? At the time, this was the International Council of Scientific Unions. Today, this has changed. This has developed enormously, and since, if my memory is correct, 2018, the ICSU is called ISC because it not only represents all the international scientific unions, but also international unions in the humanities. So it's an enormous unit, and so this ISC is still today, I think, unless you contradict me, is something has changed in the very last few months, is still the authority to which such problems are sent, and they are not treated by the IMU. I completely understand why this is done in this way, but I do also know that in many cases this has made people very unhappy, and there were a lot of debates about this. This is why I wanted to mention that. And by the way, since I'm giving this talk on the 7th of May, I cannot help but showing you what is happening today. Although this is another matter. Okay, there are various committees, and we will hear about them, and I just show you that in my book I did make a few remarks, and I show you the last 2 paragraphs of this several pages on the Commission for Developing Countries, which is incredibly interesting, let me just say that very abstractly, for its historical development, for the view on developing countries, and for what is thought to be necessary and how to do it. So it's a very interesting thing. My time is almost up. We are talking about the International Mathematical Union. And this International Mathematical Union, since 2008, or when was it, has this logo. I should have looked up the year. Anyway, it's not that old. And this logo is, of course, the Borromean rings, as it's called, or Brownian link with 3 loops. And this exists for a long time. So in Sicily, you can see this Roman villa from the second quarter of the 4th century, which has these wonderful mosaics, but usually people go to the mosaics where people are represented in all kinds of scene or children playing, but you also find this. And then if you look around, then at the end of the 6th century in Jordan, and there are other examples. By the way, these 2 examples of the Borromean link are not mentioned in Wikipedia. All the things, if you look up Borromean links in Wikipedia, it starts later than these 2. So this makes me invite you to a reflection. On the IMU website, it says that the new at the time, new IMU logo represents the interconnectedness not only of the various fields of mathematics, but also of the mathematical community around the world. This is certainly well-intentioned, it also remains rather vague. One wonders how to read the salient feature of the Brownian link, which is the reason why mathematicians are fascinated by it. Namely, the feature that it suffices to cut just 1 loop out of the 3 in order to make it all fall apart. So maybe, as I may suggest, one should interpret each loop as a separate path of promoting international cohesion in mathematics. So 1 loop could stand for the history of the international congresses of mathematicians, which started as early as 1897, as I told you. A 2nd loop could represent the IMU. It was first founded in 1920, I told you this, fell apart shortly afterwards as a consequence of the Bologna ICM in 1928. The new IMU was founded at the beginning of the 50s. It still exists and is going strong today, has taken control of the ICMs, and the procedures to choose winners of the Fields Medal and so on. So this is a 2nd loop. And the remaining 3rd loop, in my view, on the whole history and the way I presented it in the book, would reflect the structural evolution of the sciences at large, and mathematics in particular, which has made the functioning of the international community possible and which shapes this community. This includes the professionalization of mathematics in the universities during the 19th century, growth, structural evolution of the mathematical publications, for instance, also the influence of American philanthropy, which I mentioned, as well as the still growing culture of conferences that I have already mentioned on all levels for international connections in the field of mathematics in the 20s and 30s. Only when all 3 axes are solid is the link intact. And if you look at this beautiful representation of the Brownian link in Jordan, you have apples, you have pears, and in the middle you have a pomegranate. I think this is the best thing we can wish to the IMU and to the future of international mathematics. Thank you.
Okay, I talk about IMU in general, so detailed IMU activities and also various commissions will be explained by my colleagues. So IMU is, as we just learned, an international organization for the mathematical community. So members of the IMU are countries, and our budget, IMU budget, is based on membership fees paid by member countries. However, if we look at the actual IMU activities, those countries only play a partial role or official role. All IMU activities are helped in practice by individual mathematicians. In this sense, I understand IMU is the union of worldwide mathematicians, not union members. So for example, the ICM, one of the main activities of IMU, is a joint work of mathematicians from all over the world. Speakers, organizers, program and prize committees, members work together to know developments worldwide over the past 4 years. It is for all mathematicians themselves and for the next generation, future mathematicians. So these works of individual mathematicians are indispensable to hold the ICM. The same applies to other activities of the IMU. So in that sense, IMU is really the union of individual mathematicians worldwide. Nevertheless, this doesn't really mean that our mathematician community is uniform. Mathematicians are simultaneously human beings, hence our research activities reflect social environments. So, for example, there is still imbalance between genders. So the IMU has a commission, CWM, for women in mathematics. So it encourages to increase the women in mathematics. Also, researchers and students in developing countries have difficulties. So the IMU has a program to support them through the committees for developing countries, CDC, and also through the International Commission of Mathematical Instruction, which is IMU-INI. So I believe that most of mathematicians know the IMU, but it's still not yet enough well known to people, in particular to those who need help. So to increase the visibility of the IMU and its activity is one of our issues to be addressed soon. Thank you very much.
So mathematics has many faces, not the least of which are how it is perceived by and influences other sciences on the global stage. And that is the context for the International Science Council. We just heard something about the history from Norbert, and what I'm going to do now is to just briefly give you some details about how we connect, the IMU connects with the, as it's called, the ISC. So the ISC has 3 main missions. I think this is a pointer, yes. So it has been the international voice for science. It has had a mission to support research policy and scholarship in science. And as Norbert mentioned, a primary mission is to defend freedom and responsibility in the practice of science, even more needed today. But over the past few years, the agenda has been expanding under the president, Peter Gluckman. And so there is a draft strategic plan which broadens this to further directions, into further areas. And I draw your attention not only to the ones that I've just mentioned up here, but also about science diplomacy, the evolution of science, which means also trust in science and how it's perceived by others. So, is that the next one? Yes. So a little bit about the history. I didn't know Norbert was going to also already mention it, but it has a very recent history under this name. It was formed in 2018 from the merger of 2 international bodies. The main one that you might have heard of before is the International Council of Scientific Unions, or ICSU, and it merged with the International Social Science Council. But it has a much longer history. It was formed, actually, ICSU was formed in 1931 from earlier bodies, and in particular the International Research Council, which led to the formation of the IMU. Mathematicians have played significant roles in its history and its formation. Daya Reddy was the first president. He's a mathematician from South Africa. Motoko Katani was elected as president-elect in 2021. and continues now as Vice President for Science and Society. Robert Dygraft, who was the director of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, is now President-elect, and I was also elected to the governing board in January this year. There are many, many other mathematicians involved. I just plucked out some names from the list of, for example, what are called ISC Fellows. This is a category of people, distinguished people, who were selected from 2021 onwards. And you might recognize, for example, Jean-Pierre Bourguignon, Maria Esteban, Lotzi Lovash, and Cheryl Prager. They are all ISC Fellows. So mathematicians are embedded in this community in ways that you might not have seen before. A little bit about the logistics. The ISC has headquarters in Paris. More recently, it's formed what they call regional focal points that are conglomerations of multiple member bodies in regional areas. So in the Asia and the Pacific, that's heavily involving the Australian Academy of Science, which is looking after that remit, and also the regional focal point in Latin America and the Caribbean. These were formed just a couple of years ago. And as I said, the ISC has been expanding its own remit, and so at the moment it's established an office in New York in order to be the point of advice for the United Nations. It has ambitions to become the voice for science in all multilateral organizations, so anything you can think of, the IMF, WHO, all of these multilateral bodies have particular arenas that the ISC would like to be the voice of science for. If you'd like to know more, I encourage you to have a look at the website. That's just council.science, not just because of its pretty graphics, but because they have actually produced an immense array of documents, policy documents, advice documents, scoping documents about all kinds of things. In particular, there are documents that are worth looking at on open source publishing, on all kinds of other things that may interest some of you. And you can see some examples of the recent papers that they produced, for example, this one on AI. And recently there was a General Assembly in Muscat in Oman, and we produced this slide to be put up amongst many other slides from many other bodies. I should have mentioned that the ISC has 250 member organizations, which are divided into 4 categories. The first one, category 1, is the one that the IMU sits in, and it's the category of all umbrella organizations or unions of the sciences. Category 2, for example, to do with academies, national bodies, funding councils, ministries, and so on. Those 2 categories have the highest weight in terms of voting power in the ISC. So the opportunities for collaboration are what I wanted to point out, in particular for IMU, so to join scientific projects with other member organizations. We have a kind of an informal group of cognate other unions that we have been talking with, or Christoph has been very actively talking with, such as in physics, chemistry, and areas like that. Particularly with the focus on global challenges such as climate. There's interest in developing joint initiatives on open science and other initiatives to do with capacity building in underrepresented regions. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much.
So, I'm Carola-Bibiane Schönlieb. I'm a professor of applied mathematics here in Cambridge, and I'm also a member of the Committee for Women in Mathematics of the IMU, which is what I'm going to talk about now. The underrepresentation of women in mathematics has been, as we've seen in the presentation just now, or at the beginning from Norbert, has been and still is a major issue in our subject. And in one sentence, the Committee of Women in Mathematics is trying to change that, driving a change on a global level. So a bit of the history was created in 2015 to promote international relationships of regional and national activities for women in mathematics, to publicize and suggest working practices that ensure equal opportunities for women mathematicians, and to propose actions to foster equal treatment of women in the mathematical community and lead to an increase in the representation of women in mathematics. And working on these objectives is done with an annual budget of around 22,000 euros. This is the current composition of the committee. So the chair is Carolina Auraggio. The vice chair is Helene Barcelo from, Carolina is from IMPA in Rio, and Helena is from Arizona State University in the US. And you can see it's a nice spread, a kind of geographic spread across the globe in terms of representation. What are the activities that the committee is doing? The major source, or let's say no, the major vehicle of spending the 22,000 euros is an annual funding call that the CWM is managing, in particular targeted towards developing countries and supporting women in mathematics activities in these developing countries. So these could range from various types of activities. I've just, looking at my cheat sheet, I've just looked up what we have done in 2025. The decisions have already been made for this year. We have, for instance, supported the African Women in Mathematics Association. We have supported the establishment of Arab Women in Mathematics Network, and various activities in Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico, and Nigeria. So this money really brings us a very long way of supporting very exciting initiatives in these countries. Another activity is the CWM newsletter that goes out twice a year and reports several activities of the CWM, but also sometimes activities of other kind of national women in math associations. The World Meeting for Women in Mathematics is another activity that happens since 2018. So since the Congress in Rio, and here you see actually a few pictures of this. One part of the 2018 meeting was also dedicated to the memory of Mariam Mirzakhani. And so it always happens in conjunction with the ICM, as a satellite event of the ICM, I should have said. Another activity is this scheme of CWM ambassadors. So these are ambassadors of kind of similar spirit, mathematics of women encouragement in the different countries. I've just looked again, so we have at the moment 175 ambassadors from 101 countries who are spreading the activities of the CWM and who are engaging with us in fostering connections with the regional national activities. A really major output of the CWM has been the Gender Gap in Science project that some of you might have heard about, that has been spearheaded by Marie-Françoise Roy, who has been also the former chair of this committee. So this was a major effort to gather basically the status quo of the gender gap in science globally, as well as produce guidelines or recommendations of how to change it going forward, which has subsequently led to the SCGES, which is the Standing Committee for Gender Equality in Science, of which the IMU is a founding member, and that at the moment has both Carolina Auraggio as well as Marie-Françoise Roy as representatives. the remit of this committee is really to drive recommendations for narrowing this gender gap forward. The May 12 initiatives is actually, since recently, an official CWM activity, has been approved by the EC this year. And that's, May 12 is the birthday of Mara Mirzakhami, and it is a day on which initiatives, workshops are being organized, events are being organized to in memory of both her mathematics, but also her big influence onto women in mathematics as a whole. And that, by the way, has grown also out of this 2018 meeting in Rio. And then the CWM website, which has a lot of information on there, also on the science, on the Gender Gap in Science project. And I'll invite you to have a look. And yeah, so I'll leave it with the link. Maybe just to say, tomorrow is International Women's Day, so maybe also a timely day today to talk about this. I'm happy to answer any questions later. Thank you.
I am the liaison to the Commission of Developing Countries. A disclaimer, I realized that I could use slides yesterday. Ulrike sent an email yesterday just on the way to the airport. So these slides were made on the plane, and the disclaimers that I hope what's written on there is true. So a little bit about it. So it was established in 2011, merging the Commission for Development and Exchanges and Developing Countries Strategy Group. And Norbert said there was a long and interesting history, but maybe in the book. I guess the main mission is manage, strengthen, and promote the programs of the IMU in developing and economically disadvantaged countries. The definition for developing countries changes every once in a while, and last one is from November 2023. And it's based on the GNI, the gross national income. And currently there are 6 categories, priority 1 through priority 6. Right. So who are the members? There are 11 members in the commission. 6 of them are elected by the General Assembly, so the President, the Secretary of Policy, and Secretary for Grants. And 3 representatives, 1 from Africa, 1 from Asia, and 1 from Latin America. And then there are 4 more members, 2 that are elected by the IMU Executive Committee, and 2 more by ICMI, the International Commission for Mathematical Instruction, right? The IMU president, and I'm the liaison. So I collected for you some, I collected some data from the report that came for the programs of 2024. So there were 6 main programs that were that the Commission oversees. One is the conference support program. So it funds conferences in developing countries, usually up to $4,000 for a conference, but usually most of them are around 2,000. The grants are usually around 2,000. And in 2024, there are 40 conferences in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And then there is the volunteer lecturer program, the VLP. This funds kind of short, intensive courses in developing countries, so between 2 to 4 weeks. And it's supported by the American Mathematical Society and the ABEL board. Again, it's up to $4,000 for each one of these. And I think also, I looked at the data, it's also usually award something around 2,000. And in 2024, 7 courses in Algeria, 4 in Pakistan, 1 in Iran, 1 in Namibia, and 1 in Madagascar. Then there are 2 programs for individual research visits. One is the ABEL visiting program. It's an annual grant of $15,000 by the ABLE board, and it supports, I hope that's right, it's up to, I think up to 3 months visit. We had in 2024, 2 recipients, one from India and one from Vietnam. And just recently, the IMU received a very large, generous grant from the Simons Foundation of $2,000 annually for the next 3 years, so 2024 an additional 2 years. It's for travel from mathematicians from developing countries for up to 3 months. And in 2024 so far, I think there is maybe a few more that in the next round, but it's 30 scholars from 18 countries. And finally, 2 more programs that are for graduate students. One is the IMU Graduate Fellowship Program. So this is the donation given by the Breakthrough Prize laureates. It was administered by the LMS until this year, but from next year it will be taken over by the IMU, as far as I understand. That's true. That's what I read in the report. So, and Christoph says yes. So there were 5 recipients in 2024 from Gabon, Ecuador, Nigeria, Vietnam, and India. And there is the GRADE program, Graduate Research Assistantship in Developing Countries. These are programs for MSc, for master's and PhD students in the developing countries. And these are funded by voluntary donations from mathematicians or mathematical institutions. The report comes out in April, so I don't know yet. The report for 2024, I don't know yet how many and who were awarded these grants. So basically, these are the main programs of the CDC. I had a wrong, well, this is a wrong, so I shouldn't show it. This is a wrong slide, but there was discussed that the funding for the participation in the ICM for mathematicians from CDC countries, that's not been given by the CDC, apparently. This is by the organization, the bodies that organize the conferences themselves. But we have a CDC meeting in a month, and I think that what we're supposed to be discussing the activities at the ICM that are supposed to be run by the CDC. So that's it.
So perhaps we could start with questions for Norbert on the history.
Sorry, I'm asking too many questions. But, so you mentioned this wave of internationalization across academic disciplines at the end of the 19th century, and how it lived well with nationalism in some sense. And so my understanding is that 19th century was also a period for a building of European identity that went together with the nationalism in some way. And there are many sources for this, but for example, there was some idea, a nebulous idea of a common heritage, classical heritage that was supposed to unify Europe, for example. Ideas of this sort, and I imagine, I'm just guessing as an amateur, that these kinds of things would have informed, say, international meetings in history and so on. Do you have any comments on that as far as mathematics is concerned, or is this a completely wrong idea?
Okay, this is a complicated subject.
Oh, yeah.
So the 19th century is above all the century in which nation states are created and develop their own ideas about culture with different national ways of looking at it. And at the same time, you see, I mean, I'm not going to offer you an explanation for what is happening. And also in my talk, I try to just say that things are coming together, which maybe from the 20th century perspective would seem surprising, that you have nationalisms which are oriented towards their own nation states, or should be probably oriented against other nation states or be in competition with others. At the same time, there are international activities on all levels. It is, you can, I mean, there are conferences, meetings, international bodies created, not only in the sciences. I mean, it's for example, about the exact how do you say, frequency of R in music, what it should be, and how you build your clarinets or other wind instruments to exactly fit this. And this goes on, and by the way, it's only in the Versailles Treaty after World War I that a new frequency for A is fixed in one of these many thousand appendices to this peace treaty and so on. So you have this sort of international contact and organizations, and at the same time you have growing nationalism, and somehow this goes together, and I have no explanation for that, but it's an obvious fact on all levels. I quote quite a few very well-known and very well-researched books on this, and it comes to an end in 1914.
Yeah, but I'm referring to the fact that the nationalists seemed very much to like, for example, the idea of a common classical heritage, for example. This was very common. Sorry, maybe I should.
I don't know. I sort of also agree with you know. I don't see necessarily the conflict there. Just as an example, you know, Germany was really only formed in '72, and it was a very national thing, of course. But it was to unify something, you know, to come from more local to something more global. So the nationalism there is very much in the same direction, from a local to a more global. And I don't really know his history very well, but I believe that, you know, for example, the first verse of the German anthem is, you know, Germany over everything. And people know that. No longer that's the first verse, but it came from a time when the local ideas were prevalent, and it was more that it's a bigger idea, namely a unified German, was supposed to be the overarching thing, rather than. And then I think from that point, you can also extrapolate that you might want to go beyond the German borders and, you know, or national. But I don't know, maybe you
all the better. If you don't find it surprising, all the better. This matches the facts, but of course all this breaks down in 1914, and then you have all these different authors writing bad things about the other nation, especially also scientific authors and so on. But I should not.
I was going to ask a more general question of you, Norbert, that you must have done an incredible amount of research in doing this and read all sorts of sources. So what were the things that you discovered that really surprised you or were unexpected?
Well, okay, my original research was very limited. I only had 2.5 years to write this book. Theoretically, I only had 1 year, so it came to 2.5 years, so this was good. But it's essentially, I'm quoting work that was done by others. I mean, I'm not saying that this is a purely original, well, I mean, I think I mentioned some of the items which I find most important in what I found. And I cannot remember any particularly surprising. Okay, one thing that I have mentioned in my talk is this attempt in the pre-World War I phase to, and which sort of lasts also, which continues a little bit after World War I, is to activate scientific academies to work for Science International. And this was sort of, they were, I mean, I have this chapter in my book where I say these are awkward structures. They are the worst, no, not the worst, but they are particularly badly suited for international cooperation in the way that you see in IMU. And somehow after World War I, they did not play the role anymore. We just saw in, I don't know who's maybe your talk, that the ICSU came from the IAA, the International Association of Academies, which was construed. But the way the IAA tried to organize Science International, and it was said also by people participating in it, was very awkward, because they just didn't have enough members. Every single academy was already trying to be international in itself. So to fit them together and to somehow get something like scientific unions just was not obvious at all and created lots of problems. But then somehow in the 20s the problem was not there anymore, and then new types of organizations like IMU were created. This was maybe the one surprising thing that I found and I had no idea about before.
By the way, the logo was I think in my time as president, there was a competition for the logo, and the actual logo is I can't remember which group did it, but it's a result of some minimization problem.
Yes, of course. I should have said. I'm sorry.
It's interesting what you showed at the beginning.
The bounding of the three loops is particular. I mean, but it's explained on the IMU website. I didn't touch on that. I only interpreted.
The one slide that you put up, I mean, you might want to just expand upon a bit, because I'm not sure if, I think I got the point, but I'm not sure your audience did entirely. And that had to do with comparing mathematics and history and the international meetings that took place and where they took place. And there's sort of a kind of clear parallelism, which I think tells you a lot politically and in terms of the hierarchy of elites and so on. I mean, I don't know if it was obvious to other people, but I thought it was a very nice point.
I hope it was obvious because it's so parallel, really. But of course, depending on the period, different factors play out. And if you look at the detailed histories of the ICMs and of the International Historical Congresses, they do not always match. But the result sort of seems very comparable. But I didn't want to go into that.
So the logo was done by John Sullivan in Berlin at the time, the Borromean rings in there. But I wanted to ask about sort of two things that also IMU does and about their function. And one is, I mean, the central thing is the Congress. And perhaps several people could comment. I mean, my understanding is that the function of the Congress and why you do the Congress in the early 20th century was a completely different one than it could be here, because that was the only way to really gather knowledge of what's going on long before, I don't know, the archive and that sort of thing. And so the International Congress in our times, I think, can have much more the role of community building, perhaps also giving a stage to people from developing countries. I mean, the WMWM also is sort of attached to that now, and so the function has changed from information source to community building, probably. But I don't know whether there's agreement on that. I asked the question also because I see German Math Society, for example, last year didn't have an annual congress, as always, because they didn't find a place who wanted to host it. So this is debated, and you know, it's difficult to get everybody together. So that's the role of the Congress. And perhaps a completely different question, but in terms of ISC, I was wondering who in Europe would perhaps play this role of being an organization that would speak for all of science. And I'm asking that question in a situation where in the moment there's the question whether the European Union would have really money for basic research, and where there's discussions in the moment to just kill the basic research part and just put enough billions into applied research because that's more important now. Not my opinion, but things. And so there's, I mean, ISC is sort of agenda and lobby and everything for all of science, or for the whole world and all the sciences. We don't have that in Europe, right?
Since I'm not a European, I don't feel qualified to comment on that issue as to whether you should have one or not. But You're absolutely right. I think a body like the ISC is the place where you can go and influence people to talk about the fact that basic sciences are essential, and that narrow-minded governments that might be seeking to destroy basic sciences in favor of what they think is more useful science is a dangerous trend. So I think you've got to find every avenue you can to talk about basic sciences, whether it's mathematics or not, but particularly for mathematics. What was the other question you were asking about the ICMs? I started going to ICMs in 2010 because I was president of the Australian Mathematical Society, at a time when people would say to me, why would you want to go to these? These are huge affairs, you won't know anybody, and what's the point of going to a place where you don't know anybody? But what I found to my very pleasant surprise is that even beyond community building, it is a mechanism by which you break down the silos between fields of mathematics. So I could go to any talk I wanted, whether it was algebraic geometry, number theory, mathematical physics, or outreach education, history, and so on, and be able to absorb things that I would not normally find in a mathematics conference, and be able to talk to the lecturers and ask them naive questions and have them try to answer me. So I found it an eye-openingly wonderful experience, which is why I've been going to them ever since. So I think it goes beyond community building, and it's well beyond what you can get in an online kind of meeting. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, I also have a similar experience, but it happened when I was very young, so it's very early. I attended the first ICM meeting in 1990 in Kyoto, so that happened in the very early stage of my career. So I can listen to many talks in other fields which I can never listen otherwise. Yeah. So this is a very unique experience, and this is a special feature of ICM.
Just a question about the ICM organization. Are you worried about being able to find volunteers in the same way the German couldn't find a place to was willing to set up the next ICM? Given the fact that basically there's a you see, I mean, the IMU budget is what it is, and we have to, in the past years, we had to rely on some government somewhere deciding that that was the right time to, project this image of international collaboration in mathematics and a strong math community to back it up. So we've been to a few places now, and just wondering whether one should be worried about.
Yeah, we edited the bidding guideline. So now we don't have explicit description of how much amount of money we need. So somehow we opened the option so that the ICM could be, organized, held at the university, for example, by some new tools, or communication tools, and various kinds of things. So we are open to some different style of ICM might be possible still. So I hope that there should be wide range of the meetings for the next ICM and for further future.
We'll answer better in November, right? Mm-hmm. We'll have a better answer in November.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So more questions.
I wanted to endorse the view of going to the ICMs too, and nowhere do you get an overview of mathematics, and sort of, you can't define the mainstream, but if somebody ever tried looking at the proceedings of the plenary talks, would give a way in. But that wasn't my question. I was struck too by that slide between mathematics and history meetings. And I was also very curious because history, at least in the United States in departments, is often arguing whether it's a humanity or a social science. And the larger the university, the more it tends to the social science. But I'm wondering if, and you had mentioned humanities, do the social sciences meet? I saw there was a thing for them internationally. Didn't know that sociology, well, I don't know.
Well, ISC also has sociology.
There's something-
I'm sorry I didn't make the difference between humanities and socials. I should have. I realize now this was, okay, in my slides. I just said just to say it's not natural science. So, yeah.
But certainly they're very active in the ISC. There are governing board members who are social scientists, and they are very involved. Yeah.
This is some comment you made, Norbert, namely that in the big difference between ICM and maybe some the history sequence and other subjects have some as well is that it's so important for careers, and I guess it's even the difference between ICM and ICM ICMA. The applied one is very big, and I think people don't quite understand it who are outside of the field. Is this something that you saw possibly through your history evolving?
Oh yeah, it's a recent phenomenon. It's a recent phenomenon. But I mean, to date, it really you can see the beginnings of it in the 1950s, where the image of the Fields Medal starts changing in the 1950s because the way it is reported, the New York Times writes about it and so on. This is not in my book, but there actually Michael Barani has done very interesting research on that. And so it is with this that it then gets stronger and stronger. And as the IMU takes over as of 1962 in Sweden, the organization of the ICMs, this aspect becomes, I think, more and more important, and is in my view, the main reason for the importance of the ICM as well as the IMU for the mathematical community. I think this is the main source of this. Just on the question that Günther asked, I think for ICMs, it's always a good idea to look at how many people were there and what kind of a public there was, because you usually see the people give main talks and they are very present in the proceedings or the prizes and so on, the Fields Medal and other prizes. But this has become much better, I think, certainly in this century. Since Berlin already in 1998 and so on. It has the number of people and also the possibilities of bringing in younger people to participate. This depends this changes from one ICM to the next, but every time the IMU is very conscious of finding means to provide money, travel money for younger participants. The only, by accident, the only early examples of this is this 1932 ICM in Zurich. So this is a time when things are still fairly Eurocentric, and so Zurich is easy to get to, and it just so happens that this is and the next one, 1936 in Oslo, where we have a history book about this ICM by Christoph Hollings and Reinhard Sigmund Schulze, is completely different because of the political situation. Many people cannot travel. Even Severi, the head of the Fields Committee, is not allowed by Mussolini to travel to Norway because Norway is endorsing these measures against Italy because of the Ethiopian intervention of Italy and so on. So, and for example, the German participants are selected by the National Socialist Party and curb down a lot the number of people by the difficulty of freely exchanging money. To just get money to buy something to survive in Oslo. so this is these are 32 and 36. You can see very opposite views of what an ICM can be like, and so you can such an extreme opposition does not occur anymore after 1950, but there are major differences between different ICMs, and to go into that requires a lot of details, and I'm afraid I have not been able to do that in the book.
So what about the Commission for Developing Countries? The questions for Tamar. I mean, it's wonderful to have got this grant from the Simons Foundation, but I always had the impression that the demand is infinite and the funds are very small.
I have no comment on that other than this grant is really great. I think a lot of work by Christophe.
So there'll be a lot of work in administering that. Will that be done in the IMU office or?
I think it will, right?
It is, yes. It's all done.
Yeah, there's this new grant system that is facilitating the administration of grants, but yeah.
Yes.
Brief question about the
This
CDC.
last question.
Okay.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
This last question brings up, I think, a bigger issue, especially over the last 40 years or so. How has IMU funding evolved? The explicit identification of the Simons money just brings up that kind of a question. The power to accomplish what the IMU wants to accomplish is clearly proportional to its funding. So I wonder, do we know anything about?
Well, I could have said something. I mean, now IMU has a stable headquarters. That was not the case before. Before it was the home of IMU was the home institution of the president of the IMU. And but maybe Christophe should.
Should I answer? Yes, the home of the IMU was the home of the Secretary General. Actually.
Of the Secretary General.
It moved every 8 years from one place to another, and this was not necessarily or not really helpful in order to get stable funding, so to get more stable actions, because you just had to renew the persons who were in charge of the stable headquarters in Berlin. That's something that exists now since quite some time. I think it started in 2008. It has been a bid that has been made to several, and there were several proposals, and Berlin had been selected. Made it possible at least that there's a secretariat where there are people that are employed on a stable basis, meaning when there's the new Secretary General, there will not be a new secretariat somewhere else. And this is very helpful because then there's some memory which is still present because of the people who administer the IMU are still there. So that's something which is helpful. And we should not forget that this secretariat and the persons are not paid by the IMU. It's all done by the German government, the federal government, and the state of Berlin. So the secretariat is part of the Weierstraße Institute, so the VIAS, and so the IMU does not have any employee, in fact. It's a very light structure by itself. It's an NGO, as it has been explained by, and it's even an unregistered corporation. It's only registered with the German tax office in order to get the status of a non-profit organization. So the whole funding scheme is always very depending on the fact that the IMU is considered as a public charity. And a public charity, of course, has different understandings from one country to another. Nowadays in Europe, there are common rules that explains what it is, but it's more complicated if you go to other countries like the US, where you have different levels of charities, and which allows, of course, to send money from donations which are tax-free for the persons or the organizations who fund the different actions of the IMU. There has always been additional money than the membership fees coming from several countries. So, for instance, the UK always, they still continue, help with money for specific trophy grants. Money is coming from Norway, from Japan, and from several countries. But these amounts are small amounts of money because these organizations are not rich organizations, and they also have missions in their own national places where they are. It's only something where they help whenever it is needed. And when you look at the 2022 situation, a lot of help has been given by the adhering organization to move the Congress to another place if it has been necessary. So there's always a lot of help from all countries, but the organizations or the funding for something like the developing countries comes always from, very often from the US side, for reasons I think that are maybe historic or that has been like a lot the great. Money comes quite mainly from the US through FIMU. The breakout graduate fellowships come from the winners of the breakthrough prizes. So the breakthrough prize is a US-based prize, even though the winners, of course, are not necessarily US-based winners. And the Simons Foundation has always been very helpful since many years, but they do not only finance actions for mathematicians in the developing countries through the IMU, they have a lot of different activities where they are very helpful for that. Of course, these fundings are coming and they are also going. So it means it's always a finite moment when they are there. So there will be 3 years where these funds will be there, and then there will be other times where there's no funding anymore, and so we will have to find new funding. So that's something where we act pretty much like any organization who is looking for help from other places to fund our activities. So we'll see what's going on in 27 when we do not have this Simons money anymore. So it's very and evolving. Sorry, it was a bit too long.
Thank you for that. What about questions for Carola on the Committee for Women in Mathematics? I had a sort of basic one, which is how successful are we being in reducing the gender gap, and does the committee maintain statistics about this so that we can see whether we're improving or not?
Yeah, so I think, the gender, we are improving, but much slower than we would like. The gender gap in science project has really done a major job in gathering all the information globally where we are, and if you go to the website, there is a book that has all the information in it. There is a booklet that also summarizes the main points, and there is a guide of kind of good practice for how to reduce the gender gap. And this committee that I mentioned is going to drive this forward. All of this, of course, happens in conjunction with national activities, because cultures in different countries also determine a lot how much progress we are making, which is also why I think the funding that is given to, in particular, focus on national activities is so important. So yeah, the short answer is we do make progress, but it's very slow. I've been now an active mathematician for more than 20 years, and no major advances, in my opinion, have happened.
And progress is not monotonic.
Yes. So, which maybe tells you something, since this was a period where we have been talking a lot about it. But yeah, there is still a way to go. Yeah.
There's another committee of IMU which is not represented here, which is CEIC, and that used to do. I'm not up to date with what it's doing now, but it used to do some wonderful reports on journals and so on. So could you, maybe Hiraku, do you have anything to? Maybe you, Christopher.
Okay, so yeah, I mean the CIC, I think it has sort of had a bit of a revival since the last few years. Has been taken over. The chairmanship has been taken over by Ilka Agricola from Germany, and it is looking at various aspects. In particular, one of the big things that we have been discussing is really the funding of journals and trying to get a good model of publishing and making it openly available for everybody. So there was a meeting at the Science Center in September, and various people came together to try to understand also what we want to get out of this and how we can move the agenda forward. It's not an easy one, but I think at least there's some consensus. Another big question around this is also just this problem that we, I think, have these journals that are just taking advantage, journals that are not existing there in order to make money, citation cartels, effectively, that are distorting any sort of sensible interpretation of citation. I mean, they're complicated anyway, but in particular, if they're manipulated, especially in mathematics, where we have relatively low numbers of citation, it's easy to manipulate them as well. So there has been a big debate around this, and partially it was initiated by a decision by, what is it called again? Sorry? Clarivate, exactly, thank you. To actually not list mathematics any longer, because for this reason, because the indices are easily manipulated. So I think we are a little bit in a difficult situation within mathematics. So we hate and love citations and sometimes, and how to deal with that sensibly. So those are the bigger issues that have been discussed. I don't know whether you were hoping to have something more specific.
Just make a small comment on this. The fact that CEIC is not represented here is only due to the fact that Ulrike is so organized. So that's the reason. Otherwise,
very good. So we've sort of exceeded our allotted time by 5 minutes. But if there's some burning question that somebody wants to ask now. So in that case, could I invite Hiraku to close the...
Yeah, I thought about what I should say about final remark. And indeed, I'm president of the IMU. It means that I'm also the chair of the Fields Medal Committee. So currently, maybe half of my brain is occupied about the Fields Medal. So, and I also noticed that many people have opinions about the Fields Medal. So I should talk about it. But indeed, so there's some secret about the Fields Medal. So I just don't want to talk too much about it, because otherwise I might speak about something secret. So I decided to not talk about the Fields Medal. So instead, I'd like to talk about my personal story about how much I appreciate the Newton Institute. So I stayed here for about a few months in 1996, about 30 years ago. So this was supported by the agreement between the Newton Institute and the RIMS in Kyoto University. So this agreement supports the visitors from Japan, and especially for young researchers who, like me, at 30 years ago. And so this is my first appreciation to the Newton Institute and also at RIMS, to RIMS. And my visit was during the special program organized by ATIA. And I don't remember the title of the program, but it's about interaction between the quantum field theory and mathematics. So I really appreciate this choice because I mean this somehow becomes my theme in my research since then. So I really still continue to do the research in that direction. So this is really correct choice of ATIA, and I really appreciate it. And then the highlight of the program was lectures by Witten. He explained something about the gauge theory or quantum field theory. And it was really inspiring lectures, and I really enjoyed his talk, and I somehow absorbed many things from his lecture. And so that I believe that was the 3 lectures, and so ATIA record Witten's lectures, and ATIA, after Witten left the Newton Institute, ATIA showed us this video several times so that we can absorb what Witten said afterwards. And this, I believe this is very good decision, and so this I really appreciate this video recording. So this is very good system indeed, I believe. And also, what else? And in fact, I said that I understand many from Witten's lecture, but I didn't understand one key concept which he explained. I don't explain what it is, but this is a concept which is very natural in theoretical physics, but there's no mathematical foundation. So at this key concept, I cannot understand at the time, but after 20 years, I finally understood what it is and what is the mathematical rigorous definition of this concept. So I was really happy at that time, and because I can solve this problem after 20 years. And what is the lesson? So I think this my episode might have something common in the mission of IMU. So one is it is important to support young researchers, and the second is it is really important to give the lectures for the wider audience. So Witten's lectures were for mathematicians, but not considered. It's broad. And third is the video, importance of video recording, and what else? So and also that maybe I might say that as happened to my research, so the communication between in different fields is not going so smooth. So it takes some time to digest some information from other fields to absorb in other fields. So this must somehow try hard to make bridge in different fields. Not necessarily in mathematics. Sometimes it's a bridge between mathematics and other fields. And also, I think we must be patient because it might take some time to be information to be is sent. Okay, I think this is what I want to say, and I'd like to thank the Newton Institute for hospitality and also all the speakers and all panelists. I really enjoyed the conference, and I think I'm ready to start our meeting from tomorrow. Thank you very much.